The golden crown hovered above the dais, casting long, fractured shadows across the marble hall. Alpha King David stood rigid, the ornate metal gleaming in his hands. But his eyes weren't on the woman kneeling before him. They were locked onto the back of the room, where Lisa stood, her expression hollowed out by a betrayal deeper than bone. "She brought me back from the brink, David." The woman on the dais purred, her voice dripping with venomous triumph. Lisa didn't flinch. She just turned away. "Wait," David choked out, the word tearing from his throat as the realization slammed into him. The scent of the blood that saved him wasn't the woman's at his feet. It was the woman walking out the door. "Lisa, wait." But the heavy oak doors were already swinging shut. The air in the grand hall of the Silver Crescent Pack felt heavy, thick with the scent of roasted meats, expensive perfumes, and an underlying current of anticipation. Tonight was the crown ceremony. Tonight, Alpha King David, ruler of the unified Northern Packs, would announce his Luna. Lisa stood near the towering stone pillars, a stark contrast to the glittering attendees. She wore a simple, dark blue gown, devoid of the jewels and lace that adorned the other high-ranking females. She didn't need them. The quiet strength in her posture, the cool intelligence in her dark eyes, commanded a different kind of respect. Or at least, it used to. Across the room, David was holding court. He looked every inch the Alpha King, tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes the color of a stormy sea. Those eyes, which used to crinkle at the corners when he looked at her, were now fixed entirely on Elena. Elena. The woman who stood beside him, her hand resting possessively on his forearm. She was radiant in a dress of spun gold, her laughter ringing out like breaking glass. Lisa swallowed the bile rising in her throat. 3 months. That was all it had taken for David to forget a decade of loyalty, of fighting side by side, of whispered promises under the moonlight. 3 months since the ambush at Shadow Ridge. The memory flared, unwanted and visceral. The scent of copper, the sickening sound of tearing flesh. David lying motionless in the dirt, his lifeblood staining the snow. Lisa had dragged him for miles, her own body pushed beyond its limits until she reached the sacred springs. She had given him her blood, the ancient, potent bloodline running through her veins, a secret she had guarded fiercely. It was the only thing that could pull an Alpha King back from the edge of the abyss. She had collapsed then, falling into a coma that lasted weeks. When she woke, the world had shifted on its axis. David was alive, stronger than ever. But he hadn't been waiting by her bedside. He was with Elena. Elena, who claimed she had found him. Elena, who presented a conveniently timed, albeit superficial, wound on her own arm as proof of her sacrifice. "You're staring again, Lisa," a voice murmured beside her. Lisa didn't look at Marcus, David's beta, though she felt his solid presence. "I'm just observing, Marcus. It's my duty as a pack member." "It's torture is what it is," Marcus replied, his voice low, thrumming with suppressed anger. "You should have told him. You should have claimed the credit." "Credit?" Lisa scoffed softly. "If he needed credit to know my worth, then he isn't the Alpha I thought he was. And he certainly isn't the mate I wanted." But the ache in her chest belied her words. It wasn't just about the crown. It was about the bond. They hadn't officially mated, but the pull had been there. Undeniable and terrifyingly strong. Now, it felt like a severed nerve, phantom pain radiating through her soul. "He's blind," Marcus said, his jaw tight. "The poison from that rogue's blade. It must have clouded his judgment, or perhaps it clarified it." Lisa countered, her tone flat. Elena is a prominent alpha's daughter. She brings an alliance. I am an orphan with a muddy lineage. She deliberately omitted the truth of her bloodline. Only David had known, and clearly he hadn't believed it mattered. The dull roar of conversation suddenly died down. The heavy oak doors at the end of the hall swung open, and the pack elders entered in single file, their gray robes sweeping the floor. The ceremony was beginning. David stepped up to the dais, Elena trailing just behind him, a smug smile playing on her lips. The Alpha King raised a hand, and absolute silence fell over the hall. "My pack," David began, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. It was a powerful voice, one that demanded obedience. "We have weathered a storm. The rogues sought to break us, to sever the head of our alliance. But they failed." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. "I stand before you today, whole and strong, because of the bravery of one woman." David turned, his gaze softening as it landed on Elena. Lisa felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. This was it. The final nail in the coffin. When I was struck down, when the darkness closed in, she risked everything to bring me back. David continued. He reached out, taking Elena's hand. She gave of herself so that I might live. Elena stepped forward, casting a fleeting, triumphant glance in Lisa's direction. It was a micro-expression, gone in a flash, but Lisa saw it. The pure, unadulterated malice. "Therefore," David's voice rang out, clear and unwavering, "it is only fitting that the woman who saved the king should rule beside him. I present to you my chosen Luna, Elena of the Bloodwood Pack." The crowd erupted into cheers. The sound was deafening, a physical blow that knocked the breath from Lisa's lungs. David signaled to the head elder, who stepped forward holding a velvet cushion. Resting upon it was the Luna crown, a delicate circlet of silver interwoven with diamonds. As David lifted the crown, ready to place it on Elena's head, Lisa couldn't watch anymore. She turned, intending to slip out quietly, to leave this place and the man who had shattered her heart. But as she moved, a sudden, sharp scent cut through the perfume and roasted meat. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but Lisa's heightened senses caught it. Wolf's bane, mixed with the distinct, metallic tang of silver. She stopped dead. The scent was coming from the dais, from Elena. Lisa whipped her head around. David was lowering the crown. Elena was smiling, her eyes fixed on the prize. But Lisa saw the slight tremor in Elena's hand, the unnatural pallor beneath her makeup. It wasn't a triumphant smile. It was a nervous one. The pieces fell into place with terrifying speed. The rogue attack, the specific poison used, Elena's miraculous discovery of David, the faint scent she now carried. Elena hadn't saved him. She had been part of the plot to kill him. "Wait!" The word tore from Lisa's throat before she could stop it. The cheer died instantly. Hundreds of eyes turned to her. David froze, the crown hovering inches from Elena's hair. He looked at Lisa, his expression a mix of shock and irritation. "Lisa," he said, his voice dangerously low. "What is the meaning of this disruption?" Lisa ignored the stares, ignored Marcus's frantic hiss of warning. She walked toward the dais, every step deliberate, her gaze locked on the woman about to be crowned. "You can't crown her, David," Lisa said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. "Excuse me," Elena gasped, feigning outrage. "David, how dare she?" "Silence," David commanded. though his eyes remained on Lisa. "Speak plainly, Lisa, or leave." "I am speaking plainly," Lisa said, stopping at the base of the dais. She looked up at the man she loved, the man who was about to make a fatal mistake. "She didn't save you. And if you put that crown on her head, you'll be signing your own death warrant." The silence that followed was absolute. The silence stretched, thin and brittle as glass, before shattering into a cacophony of gasps and muttered insults. "Treason!" someone yelled from the back. "Jealousy makes people mad," another whispered loudly. David's face darkened, a storm brewing in his slate-gray eyes. The air around him crackled with alpha command, forcing several weaker wolves to avert their gaze. He slowly lowered the crown back onto the elder's cushion. "Those are heavy accusations, Lisa," David said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in the floorboards. "You accuse my chosen mate, the woman who bled for me, of treachery." "She didn't bleed for you, David," Lisa said, holding his gaze unflinchingly. "She refused to submit to his aura. Not to save you." Elena burst into tears, a theatrical display of distress. She buried her face in David's shoulder. "David, please. I can't bear this. I almost died for you, and she stands there, spewing lies." David wrapped a protective arm around her, his glare fixed on Lisa. "You have crossed a line. Your service to this pack buys you a moment to explain yourself before I have you thrown in the dungeons for insubordination." Lisa felt a sharp ache beneath her ribs, a physical manifestation of a breaking heart. Your service to this pack. That was all she was to him now. A soldier, a subordinate, not the woman who had carried him through the snow, whispering his name like a prayer. "The rogue who attacked you." Lisa started, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. The blade was coated in nightshade and crushed silver, a lethal combination meant to slow an alpha's healing and poison his blood. "We all know this," David snapped. "Elena suffered the same poison when she drew the venom from my wound." "Did she?" Lisa challenged, stepping closer to the dais. She ignored the warning growls from David's elite guards. "Take a breath, David. A real breath. Move past her expensive perfume." David frowned, clearly annoyed, but a flicker of doubt crossed his features. He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring. Lisa saw the exact moment it hit him. His body tensed, the protective arm around Elena stiffening. The scent of wolfsbane and silver was faint, masked by magic and perfume. But to an alpha actively searching for it, it was unmistakable. "What is that?" David murmured, his voice tight. Elena stepped back, her tears vanishing instantly. "It's a medicinal poultice, David, for the lingering pain from the wound." She gestured to the faint scar on her arm. "You know it still aches." "A poultice containing raw wolfsbane and silver?" Lisa countered, her tone mocking. "That doesn't heal, Elena. It poisons slowly. It keeps an alpha weak, malleable." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The elders exchanged uneasy glances. "Lies!" Elena shrieked, dropping the sweet facade entirely. She glared at Lisa, her eyes flashing with genuine hatred. "You are just a pathetic, jealous female who couldn't secure a mate, so you try to ruin mine." "I don't need a mate to secure my position," Lisa replied coldly. "But you do. Your father's pack is failing, Elena. The Bloodwood territory is barren. You needed the Silver Crescent's resources, and you needed an Alpha King under your control to get them." David looked between the two women, the conflict evident on his face. He wanted to believe Elena. He had built a narrative around her sacrifice. But the logic in Lisa's words, The undeniable scent was tearing that narrative apart. "Proof," David demanded, his voice hoarse. "Give me proof, Lisa, or by the moon, I will banish you myself." Lisa closed her eyes for a brief second. This was the moment of no return. To prove it, she had to reveal her own secret. The secret David had forgotten. "The wound on her arm," Lisa said, opening her eyes and staring directly at Elena. "It's a superficial cut, inflicted by a silver blade, yes. But it wasn't done to draw venom. It was done to fake a bond." Lisa rolled up the sleeve of her dark blue gown. On her forearm, stark against her pale skin, was a jagged, ugly scar. It pulsed with a faint, silvery light under the hall's chandeliers. "This," Lisa said, raising her arm for all to see, "is a blood-bind scar. When an alpha is dying from silver poisoning, only the blood of a royal lineage can cleanse it. It requires a direct transfusion, vein to vein." A collective gasp went up from the crowd. Royal bloodlines were thought to be extinct, mere myths whispered to pups. David stared at the scar, his eyes wide. The memory he had buried, or perhaps the memory that the poison had clouded, began to claw its way to the surface. The biting cold, the taste of copper, the intense burning sensation in his veins, followed by a rush of impossible power, and a face obscured by shadows leaning over him. Not blonde hair, dark hair, not blue eyes, obsidian. "You?" David whispered, the word barely carrying over the silence. "Me," Lisa confirmed, her voice cracking slightly. She hated that she sounded vulnerable. "I gave you my blood, David. I bound my life force to yours to pull you back. That's why you healed so quickly. That's why you feel so strong." She turned her gaze back to Elena, who was now trembling visibly. "Her scent didn't change because she saved you. It changed because she's been handling the very poison meant to keep you weak, hoping to slowly bind you to her through false dependence." "This is madness," Elena screamed, lunging forward. "Guards, seize her! She is a witch, a liar." But the guards didn't move. They looked to their alpha. David stood frozen. He looked at Elena, really looked at her. He saw the panic in her eyes, the desperation. Then he looked at Lisa, standing tall, bearing a scar that throbbed with a truth he could no longer deny. He had crowned the wrong woman in his heart, and he had almost crowned her queen. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The bond he thought he felt with Elena. It wasn't a mate bond. It was the insidious, creeping lethargy of the poison she carried. A dark magic designed to mimic submission. The real pull, the raw, undeniable electricity that set his nerves on fire, had always been there, simmering beneath the surface whenever Lisa was near. He had just been too blind, too clouded, to recognize it. "Check her," David rasped, his voice devoid of emotion. Two female guards stepped onto the dais and grabbed Elena's arms. She fought wildly, her glamour fading, revealing the true malice underneath. They pulled a small silver vial from the hidden pocket of her gown. The stopper was loose, the scent of wolfsbane and silver spilling into the air, pungent and undeniable. "No, David, please, it was my father. He made me." Elena sobbed, falling to her knees. David didn't look at her. His eyes were locked on Lisa. The regret in his gaze was a physical weight, heavy and suffocating. "Lisa," he started, taking a step toward her. "Don't," Lisa said, holding up a hand. The anger was gone, replaced by a profound, hollow exhaustion. She had saved him, She had exposed the truth, but the victory tasted like ash. He had still chosen someone else. He had still doubted her. "You have your truth, Alpha King," Lisa said, turning her back on him and the dais. "Rule well." Without another word, she walked down the center aisle, the crowd parting for her in silent, stunned reverence. "Wait," David choked out, the word tearing from his throat. The crown sat abandoned on the cushion, a meaningless trinket. He watched her walk away, realizing that he hadn't just lost a soldier today. He had lost his Luna. "Lisa, wait." But the heavy oak doors were already swinging shut. The slam of the heavy oak doors echoed with a finality that made David flinch. The grand hall, moments ago thrumming with anticipation, was now a tomb of awkward silence, save for Elena's pathetic sobbing on the dais. "Get her out of my sight," David growled, not sparing a glance at the woman who had nearly tricked him into a poisoned union. "Throw her in the holding cells. Send word to the Bloodwood Alpha that his daughter is a traitor. We march on his borders at dawn." The guards dragged a screaming Elena away. The pack elders murmured amongst themselves, their faces pale. The scent of wolfsbane lingered, a foul reminder of the Alpha King's near-fatal error. David rubbed his temples, a dull ache throbbing behind his eyes. It wasn't just the residual effects of the poison Elena had been subtly dosing him with. It was the crushing weight of his own stupidity. How could he not have known? He closed his eyes, forcing himself to sift through the fragmented memories of his near-death experience. The ambush, the agonizing cold, the paralyzing venom in his veins. And then, the searing heat. A power so ancient and pure it felt like swallowing a star. He remembered a voice, fierce and desperate, tearing through the darkness. "Don't you dare die on me, David. You don't have permission to die." It hadn't been Elena's high, reedy voice. It had been Lisa's. Grounded, commanding, terrified, he looked down at his own arm, where the lethal wound had been. It was unblemished, healed with a speed that had surprised even the pack healers. They had attributed it to his alpha strength and Elena's quick action. But he knew now. It was the royal blood. "Lisa!" A low growl ripped from his throat, startling the remaining pack members. It was a sound of pure self-loathing. He had paraded Elena around, showered her with affection and gratitude, while the woman who had actually bled for him, the woman who possessed a bloodline of legend, stood in the shadows and watched. He had dismissed her as a muddy lineage. He wanted to vomit. "Alpha." Beta Marcus approached cautiously, his face grim. "The hall is cleared. The elders await your command regarding the Bloodwood situation." "To hell with the elders," David snapped, pacing the length of the dais. "Where is she, Marcus? Did you see which way she went?" Marcus sighed, crossing his arms. "I saw her leave the pack house, David. She shifted and headed north, toward the jagged peaks." "The jagged peaks? That's rogue territory. It's suicide." Panic flared in David's chest, hot and sharp. "She's not a helpless pup, Alpha," Marcus reminded him, a hint of reproach in his tone. "She's probably the strongest warrior we have, and she has royal blood. I don't think rogues are her biggest concern right now." David stopped pacing, running a hand through his hair. "I have to go after her. I have to explain." "Explain what exactly?" Marcus asked, his voice steady but challenging. "That you were magically roofied into believing a lie? That you forgot the scent of the woman you fought beside for 10 years? Or that you were so desperate for a strong alliance you ignored the mate bond staring you in the face?" David flinched. Marcus was his oldest friend, the only one who could speak to him this way. But the words still stung like a physical blow. Because they were true. I was blind, Marcus. The poison. It clouded me. Maybe. But it didn't cloud you enough to stop you from looking at Elena with stars in your eyes. Marcus said bluntly. You hurt her, David. Deeply. A blood bind. That's a sacred thing. She tied her soul to yours to save you, and you handed the Luna crown to a traitor. David looked at the velvet cushion on the floor where the crown had fallen during the commotion. It looked cheap now, a hollow symbol. I'll fix it, David said, his voice hardening with resolve. I'll find her. I'll beg for her forgiveness on my knees if I have to. She is my Luna, the only one. He began to strip off his ceremonial jacket, the heavy velvet stifling him. Take command of the pack, Marcus. Fortify the borders against Bloodwood. I'm going after her. Alpha, wait. Marcus stepped in his path. It's a full moon tonight. The pull of the change will be strong. If she's out there alone, dealing with the emotional fallout of a rejected bond, she could go feral. David's heart hammered against his ribs. A feral wolf, especially one with royal blood, was a danger to herself and anyone who crossed her path. Then I need to find her faster, David said. Pushing past his beta, he burst out of the pack house doors, the cool night air hitting him like a physical force. The moon was already rising, a swollen silver orb casting long, eerie shadows across the territory. He didn't bother changing his clothes. He ran toward the edge of the woods, his bones already aching with the need to shift. As he hit the tree line, he threw his head back and let the change take him. It was a violent, painful transformation, fueled by adrenaline and regret. In seconds, a massive, midnight black wolf stood where the Alpha King had been. He shook out his dark fur, his golden eyes glowing in the moonlight. He dropped his snout to the earth, bypassing the scents of deer, rabbit, and his own patrol guards, searching for one specific thread. It was faint, masked by the pine needles and damp earth, but he found it. The scent of ozone, rain, and something uniquely Lisa. It was laced with a metallic tang that made him whine low in his throat, the scent of her distress. He let out a long, haunting howl, a sound filled with apology and desperate need, hoping it would reach her. Then he launched himself into the darkness, a black shadow streaking toward the jagged peaks, praying he wasn't too late. The wind howled through the treacherous mountain passes, a biting, relentless force that whipped Lisa's fur and chilled her to the bone. She ran not for exercise, not for patrol, but for escape. She was a blur of silver gray against the dark, craggy rocks of the jagged peaks, her paws finding purchase where lesser wolves would have slipped and fallen to their deaths. She needed distance. She needed the physical exertion to drown out the deafening roar of betrayal in her mind. He had almost crowned her. The image of David, holding that glittering symbol of power over Elena's head, burned behind her eyes. It hurt more than the silver blade that had grazed her arm, more than the agonizing process of the blood bind. She had given him a piece of her soul. She had tapped into a bloodline she had sworn to keep hidden, knowing it made her a target, just to ensure his heart kept beating. And he had woken up and chosen a convenient lie. Lisa leaped over a deep fissure in the rock, landing gracefully on the other side, her breath plumed in the freezing air. The full moon above was a harsh spotlight, offering no warmth. She felt the pull of the bond, a phantom tugging at her chest. It was weaker now, damaged by his rejection and her physical distance. But it was still there, a cruel reminder of what she had tethered herself to. Suddenly, The wind shifted, carrying a scent that made her skid to a halt, claws scraping against the stone. Rot, stale blood, unwashed fur, rogues. She had known the risks of entering this territory, but her grief had overridden her caution. Now, the reality of her situation settled in. She was alone, emotionally compromised, and in the heart of lawless lands. Low growls echoed from the shadows of the boulders ahead. 4 pairs of glowing yellow eyes materialized in the darkness. They were gaunt, heavily scarred wolves, driven mad by isolation and the lack of a pack bond. Lisa didn't back down. She bared her teeth, a vicious snarl ripping from her throat. She was tired, she was heartbroken, but she was not prey. The silver light of her royal bloodline flared in her eyes, a warning to anyone foolish enough to test her. The largest rogue, a hulking brute with half an ear missing, lunged. Lisa met him midair. She didn't rely on brute strength. She relied on years of rigorous training. She twisted, using his momentum against him, and clamped her jaws onto his shoulder, tasting rank, diseased blood. She tossed him aside like a rag doll. But there were 3 more. They attacked in a frenzy, lacking strategy but making up for it in sheer, desperate savagery. Lisa fought like a demon, a whirlwind of silver fur and snapping teeth. She dodged a snap at her throat, raked her claws across a muzzle, and delivered a bone-crunching bite to a foreleg. But she was outnumbered, and the emotional toll of the night was draining her stamina faster than the physical exertion. A smaller rogue managed to slip past her guard, its jaws snapping shut on her hind leg. Pain flared, hot and blinding. Lisa yelped, her rhythm broken. The distraction was all the others needed. The brute with the missing ear recovered and slammed into her side, sending her crashing against the unforgiving rock face. She slid to the ground, her vision blurring. The rogues closed in, the scent of their impending victory foul in the air. Lisa struggled to rise, her injured leg refusing to bear weight. This was it. She had survived a blood bind only to be torn apart by scavengers. She closed her eyes, bracing for the final strike. But it never came. Instead, a roar shook the very foundation of the mountain. It wasn't a howl. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated alpha fury. A massive, midnight black blur launched over Lisa, crashing into the group of rogues like a freight train. David. He didn't fight with strategy. He fought with a terrifying primal violence. He tore through the rogues, his massive jaws snapping bone and crushing windpipes. He was a force of nature, a dark god dispensing vengeance. The rogues, realizing they had provoked an alphaking, scattered, whimpering and leaving their dead behind. David stood over the carnage, his chest heaving, his black fur slick with blood that wasn't his own. He slowly turned toward Lisa, his golden eyes filled with a terrifying mix of rage and desperate relief. He shifted back to his human form, ignoring his nakedness in the freezing cold. He dropped to his knees beside her, his hands hovering over her trembling, silver-gray body. Lisa. His voice was a broken rasp. Goddess Lisa. I thought I lost you. Lisa forced a shift, her human form collapsing onto the hard stone. She was bruised, bleeding from her leg, and shivering violently. She pulled her torn dress around her, refusing to look at him. You did, she whispered, the words carrying more weight than a scream. David flinched, the words striking him harder than any rogue's bite. He reached out, his fingers brushing against her cold arm. Let me help you. Let me heal you. Lisa jerked away from his touch, a hiss escaping her lips. Don't touch me. You don't have the right. I am your alpha, David said, his voice laced with desperation. trying to command the situation. "You are an alpha," Lisa corrected, finally meeting his gaze. Her dark eyes were devoid of the warmth they once held for him. "But you are no longer mine." The silence that followed was heavier than the mountain stone around them. David knelt in the snow, the cold biting at his bare skin, but he barely felt it. All he felt was the icy void where the bond, however fragile it had been, used to hum. "You are no longer mine." The words echoed in his skull, an irrefutable judgment. "Lisa, please," David begged, the Alpha King completely discarded. He was just a man, desperate and terrified. "You're injured. The cold will kill you if the wound doesn't. Let me take you back to the pack house, to the healers." "So you can lock me away?" Lisa challenged, her voice weak but her spirit unyielding. "Or maybe you want to parade me around now that you know I have royal blood? A shiny new toy for your throne?" "No, never." David ran a hand through his hair, smearing rogue blood across his forehead. "I was a fool, Lisa. I was poisoned, yes, but I was also blind. I let the pressure of the alliance, the fear for the pack, cloud what was right in front of me. What was right in front of you was a woman who gave you her soul," Lisa said, tracing the faint, silvery scar on her arm. It throbbed with a dull ache. "And you traded it for a golden dress and a fake smile." She struggled to sit up, wincing as her injured leg protested. David instinctively reached out to support her, but stopped himself just before making contact, remembering her reaction. "I can't undo what happened," David said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "But I can spend the rest of my life making it right. I banished Elena. The Bloodwood Pack will face the consequences of their treason. I only want you, Lisa. I only ever wanted you." "Words, David." Lisa sighed, leaning back against the rock face. She looked exhausted, pale and fragile in the harsh moonlight. "They're just words, and yours have lost their value." She closed her eyes, focusing her energy inward. The royal bloodline wasn't just for healing others. It was a potent force within herself. Slowly, a faint, silvery aura began to emanate from her skin. The bleeding on her legs slowed, the edges of the wound beginning to knit together with unnatural speed. David watched in awe. He had heard tales of the royal wolves, of their near-mythical healing abilities. But seeing it was entirely different. It was beautiful, and it terrified him, because it proved just how much he didn't know about the woman he loved. "I don't need your healers," Lisa said, her voice stronger as the magic worked its course. "And I don't need you." She stood up, testing her weight on the injured leg. It held. She looked down at him, an Alpha King kneeling in the snow. "Go back to your pack, David. They need their king, especially with a war brewing with Bloodwood." "I'm not leaving without you," David said stubbornly, rising to his feet. He was taller, broader, a physically imposing figure. But in that moment, Lisa felt like the towering presence. "You can't force me," Lisa said calmly. "Not anymore. The bond is damaged. If you try to command me through it, it will shatter completely, and it might take both of us down with it." David knew she was right. Forcing a rejected bond was a dangerous game, one that often ended in madness or death for the weaker party. And right now, he felt like the weaker party. "Where will you go?" he asked, a note of defeat creeping into his voice. "I don't know," Lisa admitted, looking out over the jagged peaks. "Away from pack politics, away from lies." Maybe I'll find others like me. Maybe I'll just find peace. She turned and began to walk away, her limp barely noticeable. "Lisa!" David called out, a final, desperate plea. She stopped, but she didn't turn around. "I will fix this," David vowed, his voice echoing off the mountains. "I will build a kingdom worthy of you. I will prove that I am not the blind fool you saw tonight. And when I have, I will find you. And I will beg for you to be my Luna." Lisa stood still for a long moment. The wind whipped her dark hair around her face. "Don't waste your time, Alpha," she said quietly, her words carried back to him on the breeze. "A broken glass can't hold water, no matter how much gold you try to patch it with." Then she shifted into her silver-gray wolf form and vanished into the shadows of the peaks. David stood alone in the snow, the silence pressing in on him. He had his life, he had his crown, but he had never felt more empty. He shifted back to his wolf form, a solitary, mournful howl tearing from his throat. A sound that mourned the loss of a Luna he never truly had. 2 years. 2 years since the night the Silver Crescent Pack almost crowned a traitor. 2 years since Alpha King David lost his soul. The pack house was different now. The opulent tapestries and frivolous decorations Elena had favored were gone, replaced by functional maps, weapon racks, and a stark, militaristic efficiency. David stood at the head of the war table, his expression carved from stone. He was no longer the confident, charismatic king who had blindly accepted a false savior. He was harder, colder. They called him the Iron King now. "The Bloodwood remnants are retreating," Beta Marcus reported, pointing to a map marked with red and black pins. "They're disorganized. Without Elena's father leading them, they're crumbling into factions." The war with Bloodwood had been swift and brutal. David had channeled every ounce of his grief, rage, and self-loathing into dismantling the pack that had conspired to poison him and steal his throne. He had been merciless. "Good," David said, his voice devoid of satisfaction. "Offer the survivors integration into our lower ranks. If they refuse, drive them out. I want no trace of that lineage near my borders." Marcus nodded, making a note. He hesitated, looking at his alpha. David had aged 5 years in 2. The silver strands at his temples were premature, born of stress and a hollow, aching loneliness. "Alpha," Marcus began carefully. "The Council of Elders is convening tomorrow. They are pressing the issue of the Luna again." David's head snapped up, his golden eyes flashing dangerously. "The Luna position is filled. In absentia. I have made this clear. They argue that a pact needs a physical presence, David." Marcus argued gently. "The morale is stable. But a king without a queen. It makes us look vulnerable to the southern alliances. They want you to take a chosen mate, a political union." "Let them talk," David growled, slamming his hands flat on the table. The wood groaned under the pressure. "I will not bind myself to another woman for politics. I will not make that mistake again." He turned away from the table, walking toward the large window that overlooked the training grounds. Down below, young warriors sparred, their shouts carrying on the wind. He touched his forearm, rubbing the spot where Lisa's blood-bind scar would have mirrored his own lethal wound. He still felt the phantom hum of the bond, a weak, pulsing tether that stretched out into nothingness. He had sent trackers, search parties, even utilized seers. Lisa had vanished completely. It was as if the earth had swallowed her whole. Or, more likely, she had used her royal bloodline to mask her scent and presence entirely. She didn't want to be found. "I know it's hard, David. Marcus said softly, standing behind him. But you have a duty to the pack. You can't put your life on hold forever for a ghost. She's not a ghost, Marcus, David said, his voice low and tight. She's out there. I feel her. Faintly, but she's there. And what if you find her? Marcus challenged. What then? You think she's just going to fall into your arms after what happened? She told you not to look for her. She told you it was broken. David closed his eyes. The memory of her words on the mountain still cut like a fresh wound. A broken glass can't hold water. I don't expect her to forgive me, David admitted, the truth bitter on his tongue. I don't expect her to want me. But I need to know she's safe. I need to see her. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the war room burst open. A border patrol guard, panting heavily, practically fell into the room. Alpha, the guard gasped, dropping to one knee. Intruder at the southern border. David frowned. The southern alliances were peaceful. A rogue? No, Alpha. The guard looked up, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. It's a single female. She crossed the border without triggering the wards. She took down a patrol of 5 without shifting. David's heart skipped a beat. Did you get a scent? Marcus demanded, stepping forward. No, Beta. The guard shook his head. She smelled like ozone, like a thunderstorm. The air in the room seemed to vanish. David grabbed the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. Ozone. Rain. Lisa. Where is she? David demanded, his voice a lethal whisper. She didn't run, Alpha. The guard swallowed hard. She demanded an audience. She's waiting at the border outpost. David didn't wait to hear more. He bypassed the door entirely, shifting mid-stride and crashing through the war room window, landing heavily on the training grounds below. He ignored the startled shouts of his warriors, transforming into the massive black wolf and tearing toward the southern border, leaving a trail of dust and stunned silence in his wake. He didn't know why she was back. He didn't care. The ghost had returned, and he was not going to let her disappear again. The southern border outpost was usually a quiet assignment. A small stone cabin nestled against the tree line, designed for monitoring rather than combat. Today, it felt like the center of a storm. Lisa stood in the clearing before the cabin, entirely unbothered by the dozen heavily armed guards surrounding her. She hadn't aged, but she had changed. The simple dark blue gown was gone, replaced by practical, form-fitting leathers. Her dark hair was braided tight against her skull. The quiet strength she possessed 2 years ago had crystallized into something sharper, something far more dangerous. She emanated a subtle, pulsing energy that made the guards uneasy. They were seasoned warriors, yet they couldn't bring themselves to meet her obsidian gaze for more than a second. The earth trembled slightly. The guards tensed, raising their silver-tipped spears. A massive black wolf burst from the tree line, skidding to a halt in the clearing. The sheer force of his arrival sent a wave of dust washing over the group. He didn't look at his men. His golden eyes were locked entirely on Lisa. David shifted, standing naked and chest heaving in the cool air, before hastily accepting a cloak tossed by a frantic guard. He stepped forward, the command of the alphaking momentarily forgotten in the face of the woman who held his soul. Lisa, he breathed, the name tasting like salvation on his tongue. Lisa didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She looked at him with an unreadable expression, calculating and cold. Alpha King David, she said, her voice clear and formal, lacking any of the intimacy they once shared. I request a parley. David stopped, confused. A parley? Lisa, you don't need to request anything. You are welcome here. This is your home. This hasn't been my home for a long time, Lisa replied smoothly. And I am not here as a member of the Silver Crescent. She reached into a pouch at her belt and produced a heavy, iron medallion, holding it up for him to see. It bore the crest of a crescent moon eclipsed by a jagged mountain peak. A murmur rippled through the guards. David stared at the medallion, shock slackening his jaw. The obsidian peak, Marcus said, arriving breathless behind David. The beta looked between the medallion and Lisa, disbelief etched on his face. That's a myth, a rogue sanctuary. It was a sanctuary, Lisa corrected, turning her gaze to Marcus. Now, it is a unified pack, and I am its alpha. Silence descended on the clearing, heavy and absolute. David felt the ground tilt beneath his feet. She hadn't just survived. She had conquered. She had taken the lawless, the broken, the outcasts of the jagged peaks and forged them into a pack. And she had claimed the title of Alpha. You're an alpha, David repeated, the words feeling strange in his mouth. Female alphas were rare enough, but one who built a pack from nothing in 2 years was unheard of. I am, Lisa said, lowering the medallion. And my borders have been encroached upon by Silver Crescent patrols. David blinked, snapping back to the political reality. We have been hunting the remnants of the Bloodwood Pack. They scattered into the mountains. We meant no disrespect to your territory. We didn't know it existed. Ignorance is not an excuse for trespass, David, Lisa said, her tone devoid of warmth. Your wolves have been aggressive, crossing the river boundary, disrupting our hunts. I will issue an immediate withdrawal, David promised, taking a step closer. He wanted to reach out, to touch her, to verify she was real. But the invisible barrier between them felt thicker than stone. I swear it, Lisa. I'll pull them back today. See that you do, Lisa said, turning to leave. Consider this a formal warning. Next time, my wolves will not be so restrained. Wait, David called out, panic flaring. He couldn't let her walk away after 2 minutes, not after 2 years of searching. Is that the only reason you came? A border dispute? Lisa paused, her back to him. She stood still for a long moment, the wind tugging at her braided hair. It is the only reason the Alpha of Obsidian Peak came, she said quietly, without turning around. David's heart hammered. He caught the subtle distinction. And what about Lisa? He asked, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. Why did she come? Lisa finally turned her head, looking at him over her shoulder. For a fleeting second, the cold Alpha facade slipped, revealing a glimpse of the woman who had bled for him in the snow. To see if the iron rusts, she said softly, before shifting seamlessly into her silver-gray wolf form and vanishing into the dense forest, leaving David standing in the dust, the scent of ozone and rain lingering like a promise or a threat. The withdrawal order was given before David even returned to the pack house. He confined the Silver Crescent forces strictly to their established borders, ordering severe punishment for any wolf who crossed into the jagged peaks. He spent the next week in a state of restless agitation to see if the iron rusts. He knew what they called him, the Iron King. He knew he had become harsh, unforgiving. It was the only way he knew how to lead after the betrayal, a protective shell forged in grief. But she had seen through it instantly. She wanted to know if there was a man left beneath the armor, or if he was truly just cold metal. He needed to show her. But he couldn't do it as an alpha king demanding an audience. He had to do it as a man. On the 8th night, a new moon casting the territory in darkness, David left the pack house alone. He wore no armor, no royal crests, just simple clothes and a cloak against the chill. He crossed the river boundary, fully aware he was violating the very order he had given his men. The jagged peaks were intimidating in the dark, the terrain treacherous and unforgiving. He didn't have to walk far before he felt them. Eyes in the dark, the scent of wild, untamed wolves, mixed with the unmistakable grounding scent of Lisa's ozone. He stopped in a small clearing, holding his hands out, palms open. "I come unarmed," David called out, his voice echoing off the rocks. "I seek an audience with your alpha." 3 massive wolves stepped from the shadows. They were scarred, rough-looking, entirely unlike the polished guards of the Silver Crescent. They didn't shift, but they snarled low in their throats, a clear warning. A 4th wolf appeared, silver-gray, smaller than the rest, but carrying a presence that forced the others to lower their heads in submission. Lisa shifted, her leathers blending into the darkness. She looked at him, her expression guarded. "You are trespassing, Alpha David," she said, her voice echoing the harshness of the mountains. "And you are alone. Are you arrogant or just foolish?" "Neither," David said, taking a slow step forward. The 3 rogue wolves growled, stepping in his path. He stopped, keeping his eyes on Lisa. "I am here as a beggar." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "The Iron King begs. The man does," David corrected gently. He slowly lowered himself to one knee, the damp earth seeping through his trousers. He ignored the shocked murmurs of the wolves surrounding him. An alpha king kneeling to another alpha in their territory was a profound act of submission. Lisa's eyes widened slightly, the hard edge to her demeanor faltering for a fraction of a second. "Get up, David. You humiliate yourself. I humiliated myself 2 years ago when I couldn't see the truth," David said, his voice raw, stripped of all pride. "I don't care about my pride anymore, Lisa. I only care about you." He looked up at her, baring his soul. "I built the kingdom I promised. The Silver Crescent is secure, the traitors are gone. But the throne is empty, and it will remain empty forever if you don't return to it. I have my own pack now." Lisa gestured to the rough wolves behind her. "These are my people. They were broken, discarded. I won't abandon them." "You don't have to," David said quickly, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. "We can unify the packs. The Silver Crescent and the Obsidian Peak. They can have a home, security, resources. We can rule together, as equals." Lisa stared at him, searching his face for deceit, for the arrogant king she had left behind. She saw only desperate sincerity. "You offer an alliance," she said slowly. "I offer a partnership," David corrected. "But more than that. I offer my life, Lisa. I offer the bond that I was too stupid to accept. If you'll have me." He reached into his cloak and pulled out the Luna crown, the same silver and diamond circlet that had caused so much pain. He held it out to her, his hand trembling slightly. "I kept it," he whispered. "I swore no one else would ever wear it." Lisa looked at the crown, the symbol of everything she had wanted and everything she had lost. The silence stretched, tense and fraught with years of unsaid words and unhealed wounds. She took a step forward, the rogue wolves parting for her. She stopped right in front of him, looking down at the kneeling king. "You ask for a lot, David," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You asked me to trust a man who broke my heart. I know. David bowed his head, accepting the judgment. I am asking for a miracle. Lisa reached out, but she didn't take the crown. She reached down, her fingers brushing against the rough stubble on his jaw. The touch sent a jolt of electricity through them both, a violent spark of a dormant bond snapping back to life. David gasped, looking up. Keep the crown for now, Lisa said, her obsidian eyes softening just a fraction, reflecting the starlight. I don't need a piece of metal to know my worth. She grabbed the lapels of his cloak and pulled him to his feet, her gaze locking onto his. Let's see if the man is worth the trouble first, she murmured. The unification of the silver crescent and the obsidian peak was not a smooth process. It was a clash of cultures. The disciplined, traditional pack of the valleys merging with the wild, battle-hardened survivors of the mountains. There were fights, disagreements, and moments where David thought the fragile peace would shatter, but Lisa was the anchor. She navigated the tensions with a ruthless grace, demanding respect from David's traditional elders, while ensuring her own wolves felt heard and protected. David watched her, awe replacing the grief that had defined him for 2 years. She was a magnificent Luna, far better than Elena ever could have been, far better than David felt he deserved. They hadn't finalized the mating bond. Lisa was holding him at arm's length, testing the waters, ensuring the Iron King truly had a heart capable of partnership, not just command. They were in the war room, finalizing the integration of patrol routes, when the alarm bells rang. It wasn't the border bells. It was the central courtyard alarm. An internal threat. David and Lisa sprinted from the room, bursting onto the balcony overlooking the courtyard. Below, chaos had erupted. A small faction of older Silver Crescent wolves, loyalists to the strict traditions and resistant to the integration of the rogues, had staged a coup. They had cornered a group of Lisa's younger wolves, weapons drawn. Abominations! The leader of the traditionalists, a scarred veteran named Kale, bellowed. We will not let our pack be polluted by mountain trash. David felt the familiar, cold rage spike in his chest. He prepared to leap over the balcony, to crush Kale for daring to threaten the peace he was so desperately trying to build. But Lisa beat him to it. She didn't shift. She simply vaulted over the stone railing, landing gracefully in the center of the conflict. The impact of her landing seemed to ripple through the stone, silencing the courtyard. She stood up slowly, facing Kale, completely unarmed. The royal bloodline flared to life, not as a healing aura, but as a terrifying, oppressive silver light that radiated from her skin, casting long, sharp shadows. You speak of pollution, Kale. Lisa's voice didn't echo. It bypassed the ears and vibrated directly in the bones of everyone present. It was the command of a royal alpha. You speak of tradition. Kale faltered, his spear trembling in his hands. The sheer pressure of her aura was forcing weaker wolves to their knees. The only tradition that matters is loyalty, Lisa continued, stepping closer to the armed veteran. These mountain trash fought for their survival every day. They know loyalty better than a man who draws a weapon on his own packmates because he fears change. She didn't touch him. She didn't have to. The power rolling off her was enough to make Kale drop his spear. It clattered loudly against the cobblestones. David watched from the balcony, his heart pounding not with fear, but with profound reverence. This was his queen, not a passive figurehead to be paraded around, but a force of nature who could bring a rebellion to its knees with a look. Lisa turned her head, looking up at David on the balcony. The silver light faded slightly, the terrifying royal alpha receding to reveal the woman he loved. She gave him a barely perceptible nod. An invitation. David didn't hesitate. He leapt down, landing beside her. He didn't take charge. He stood shoulder to shoulder with her, a united front. "Take them to the cells," David ordered his guards, his voice booming with unquestionable authority. "They will be judged for treason against the unified pack." As the rebels were dragged away, the courtyard fell silent again. The tension was gone, replaced by a collective realization that the power dynamic of the Silver Crescent had irrevocably shifted. They were not ruled by a king alone. They were ruled by equals. Lisa turned to David, the adrenaline of the confrontation fading, leaving a vulnerability in her dark eyes he hadn't seen in years. "You didn't take over," she noted softly, for his ears only. "It was your fight," David replied, reaching out to gently brush a stray braid behind her ear. "And you handle yourself beautifully." Lisa leaned into his touch, a small, genuine smile finally breaking across her face. The air between them crackled, the dormant bond flaring, pulling taut and vibrating with undeniable energy. "I think the iron has softened enough," Lisa whispered. She reached up, grabbing the collar of his shirt and pulled him down. When their lips met, the bond snapped into place with the force of a lightning strike. It wasn't the weak poison tether David had felt with Elena. It was a raging inferno, a merging of souls that made the earth beneath them tremble. A collective gasp went up from the pack as a visible wave of energy, silver and gold intertwining, pulsed outward from the alphas, washing over the courtyard. It was a true mating bond, acknowledged by the moon and cemented in blood. David pulled back slightly, resting his forehead against hers, both of them panting. He looked into her eyes, seeing the reflection of his own complete, utter devotion. "My Luna," he whispered, the words finally holding the weight they were meant to. Lisa smiled, her hands resting flat against his chest, feeling the steady, strong beat of the heart she had saved. "My king," she replied. They stood together in the courtyard of their unified pack, the scars of the past acknowledging the strength of their future. The alpha who begged had finally earned his queen, not with a crown, but with the painful, necessary breaking of his own pride. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, redemption, and a fiercely independent Luna, please leave a like. What did you think of Lisa's revenge and David's groveling? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to share this with your fellow Werewolf Romance fans. Subscribe for more intense, dramatic stories.